In 1931, a mild-mannered insurance agent in Liverpool was convicted of beating his wife to death and then had his conviction overturned on appeal, marking the first time in British legal history that a murder verdict was quashed on the grounds that it was simply not supported by the evidence. To this day, no one has ever been charged again. The killer of Julia Wallace, whoever that may be, got away with it. And it all started with a single phone call from a man who never existed. Stay with me, because this case is about to get much, much stranger. Liverpool, England. January 1931. The city is deep in the grip of the Great Depression. In a modest terraced house at 29 Wolverton Street, in the Anfield district, lived William Herbert Wallace and his wife Julia. He was 52 years old, she was 69. By all accounts, they were a quiet, somewhat reclusive couple. Wallace worked as an insurance agent for the Prudential Assurance Company, collecting small weekly premiums door to door across some of Liverpool's poorest neighborhoods. In the evenings, he played chess. And it was chess that set everything in motion. On the evening of Monday, January 19, 1931, at approximately 7:15 p.m., a telephone call was placed to the City Café in North John Street, the meeting place of the Central Chess Club, where Wallace was scheduled to play that night. Wallace hadn't yet arrived. The call was taken by the club captain, Samuel Beattie. The caller identified himself as R.M. Qualtrough and left a message asking Wallace to visit him the following evening at 25 Menlove Gardens East to discuss an insurance matter. Wallace arrived at the club around 7:45 p.m., received the message, and noted the address. He didn't recognize the name Qualtrough. He didn't question it. After all, new business was new business. But here's the first twist: 25 Menlove Gardens East does not exist. There is a Menlove Gardens North, a South, and a West. But no East. It never existed. And the name R.M. Qualtrough? No one by that name has ever been found in any Liverpool record from that period. Someone had sent William Wallace on a wild goose chase to an address that was a phantom. The question is, why? And what was about to happen back at 29 Wolverton Street while he was gone? The following evening, Tuesday, January 20th, Wallace set out to find 25 Menlove Gardens East. And he made absolutely sure people saw him doing it. He asked a conductor on the tram. He asked a police officer. He asked a newsagent. He stopped multiple strangers for directions. He spent roughly 45 minutes wandering the Menlove Gardens area, asking anyone and everyone where this address might be. Critics would later call this the behavior of a man constructing an alibi in real time. Supporters would call it the genuine confusion of a meticulous, slightly obsessive man confronted with an address that made no sense. At around 8:45 p.m., Wallace returned home to Wolverton Street. He would later tell police that he found the front door and the back door locked and that his key wouldn't work in the back door at first. He tried again. It opened. He entered the house. Inside the parlor, a small front room the Wallaces rarely used, he found Julia. She was lying face down on a Macintosh raincoat, which had been partially burned. She had been struck 11 times on the head with tremendous force, her skull fractured so severely that brain matter was exposed. The room was splattered with blood. And yet, bafflingly, almost nothing else in the house had been disturbed. Wallace went next door to his neighbors, the Johnstons, and told them, quote, "Something terrible has happened." They accompanied him back inside. Police arrived shortly after. Now, here's where it gets strange. The murder weapon was never found. Police searched the house, the drains, the yard, the surrounding streets. Nothing. Whatever was used to inflict those 11 savage blows simply vanished. Some investigators speculated it could have been an iron bar from the fireplace, but the Wallace's iron bar was accounted for.
Others suggested a heavy implement brought by the killer and taken away. But Wallace himself showed no signs of concealing anything.
His clothing, when examined, bore no significant bloodstains, remarkable, given the extreme violence of the attack and the blood-soaked crime scene. That Macintosh became one of the most debated pieces of evidence. It belonged to Wallace himself.
Why was Julia lying on her husband's Macintosh?
The prosecution's theory was chilling. Wallace had stripped naked, put on the Macintosh to shield himself from blood spatter, murdered Julia, cleaned himself, burned portions of the coat, redressed, and left the house to construct his alibi. It was, they argued, a premeditated killing of extraordinary coldness. The defense countered that Julia may have thrown the Macintosh over her shoulders to answer the door on a cold night. It was winter, the house was drafty, and that the killer was someone she willingly admitted into the parlor.
Someone she knew.
And then there's the phone call. Police traced the call to a telephone box just 400 yards from Wallace's own home.
It was placed at 7:15 p.m. Wallace was seen at his home until at least 7:10 p.m.
Could he have sprinted 400 yards, placed the call, disguised his voice, and then traveled to the chess club in time to arrive by 7:45? It was physically possible, barely.
But the timing was extraordinarily tight. What would you have done with that evidence? Would you convict on that margin? Wallace was arrested and stood trial in April 1931.
The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for just 1 hour before returning a guilty verdict.
Wallace was sentenced to hang. But the story doesn't end there. Not even close.
Wallace's lawyers appealed to the Court of Criminal Appeal, and on May 19, 1931, the court did something it had never done before. It overturned a jury's murder conviction, ruling that the verdict was, quote, not supported having regard to the evidence. The Lord Chief Justice stated that the case against Wallace was built entirely on circumstantial evidence and that it did not meet the threshold for conviction.
Wallace walked free.
He returned to Liverpool. But his life was destroyed.
Neighbors shunned him.
Children threw stones at his windows.
He was transferred to a different prudential district.
He died just 2 years later, in February 1933, of kidney failure.
He was 54 years old.
He maintained his innocence until his last breath.
So if Wallace didn't kill Julia, who did?
There has always been one primary suspect, a young man named Richard Gordon Perry. Perry was 22 years old in 1931 and had previously worked for the Prudential under Wallace.
He knew Wallace's schedule.
He knew Wallace played chess on Monday nights. He knew the layout of the house. He knew where Wallace kept his insurance collection money, and roughly £4 was missing from a cash box after the murder.
A small amount.
Almost insultingly small as a motive for murder.
Perry was interviewed by police. He provided an alibi. He said he was with friends that evening.
His alibi was accepted, and he was never charged.
But decades later, in 1981, a radio journalist named Roger Wilkes tracked down Perry's former alibi witness, a woman named Lily Lloyd, who by then was elderly.
She reportedly told Wilkes that Perry had asked her to lie for him, that his alibi was false, and that on the night of the murder, he had come to her with bloody gloves.
Perry himself, when confronted by journalists in the 1960s, refused to discuss the case. He died in 1980.
But even the Perry theory has its problems. There's no forensic evidence tying him to the scene.
No murder weapon was ever linked to him. And the question remains, would Julia Wallace have willingly let Perry into the parlor, lit the gas lights, and sat down with him? Some say yes. Others aren't so sure.
Nearly a century later, the Wallace case remains open. No one has been officially convicted. The phone call from R.M. Qualtrough has never been explained. The murder weapon has never been found. And the truth about what happened inside 29 Wolverton Street on the night of January 20, 1931, may have died with everyone involved. Was William Herbert Wallace a cold-blooded genius who orchestrated the perfect murder and the perfect alibi only to be undone by a jury and then saved by a court of appeal? Or was he a gentle, bookish man who came home one evening to find the worst nightmare of his life waiting in the parlor? What do you believe? This has been Obscura Files. If this case kept you guessing, drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one. Was it Wallace? Was it Perry? Or was it someone we've never even considered? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. I'll see you in the next one.